Why did people enjoy Souls games more simply when they were told it was easier without anything actually being changed? This is a psychological effect. It's called priming. It's a type of cognitive bias. Basically, if you are exposed to a certain stimulus, it can then shade the way that you react to further stimuli. For example, people were given the exact same summaries of books. Even though the summaries were exactly the same, one was labeled as it had spoilers, the other was labeled as spoiler-free. And the people who read the summary that was labeled as having spoilers, even though it had the exact same, words in it, got more upset than the ones that were labeled spoiler-free. So the actual content of the summary didn't matter. Similarly, the actual content of video games only matters in so much as you perceive it a certain way. So part of the reason why people like easy mode, aside from them actually being, easier, is the confirmation that you are playing on easy mode makes you perceive the game as easy. This was seen all the time in games on the NES, which were localized and often had their difficulty changed. While the Japanese game only had one difficulty, sometimes they would make it easier for an American audience and label the Japanese difficulty as hard, even though it was normal. And people would perceive that as normal and hard. However, when the same thing happened in reverse, when the American difficulty was made, harder, they still perceived the American difficulty as normal. So again, remember, most of the things that video essayists do are not scientific. We would need to have a really randomized, controlled, blind study. But it is very likely that if you go into an experience and are told you are on easy mode, you will think that whatever that relative difficulty is easier than if you were told this game is hard. Which is why I think this discussion about should Souls games be hard is almost manufactured. It's a talking point for news media. In my opinion, and, I genuinely feel like all games should have as many granular options as possible, even when it comes to difficulty. But in my opinion, I don't find them very hard. And I genuinely do not think I am that good of a gamer. I'm all right. I think a lot of that is I'm not going into them with the preconceived notion that they're hard. I think, and, this would need a further scientific study to prove, but I think a lot of the difficulty that people feel going into Souls games is a result of this cognitive bias, of this priming effect. We've primed people so much to believe that Souls games are the most unfair, most hard, most soul moral shattering games out there, and they're not. I would say they weren't that much more difficult than Tales RPGs I've played, or I don't know, any random Devil May Cry, or a particularly challenging Zelda, if I'm gonna be completely honest. We have primed people to think that they are hard so much that people who enjoy difficulty automatically enjoy the game, and people who don't enjoy difficulty or struggle with difficulty automatically don't enjoy the game, and they never actually get to the point where the game is being played on its own merits. And like I said, that makes perfect sense, because Dark Souls is a game that's fair doesn't get as many clicks as Dark Souls is a game that's unfair. Now, I think there's certainly still a lot of things that we can complain about when it comes to Dark Souls, like not having a colorblind mode is inexcusable. Not having options that help the visually impaired is inexcusable, especially when games like Street Fighter 6 have implemented them. Not having, menu font size sliders, that's inexcusable. But also, to be fair, Miyazaki seems to be on our side for that, and Bandai Namco just kind of sucks. And that ends up being business politics, and I mean, we should still complain to make Bandai Namco, wisen the fuck up. In fact, I actually don't think there's anything you shouldn't complain about. Like I said before, complaining is 90% of what gamers do about every game. But yeah, I do think that a large reason why people don't like Souls games is because they're told they're not supposed to, and a large reason that they do is because they're told they're supposed to. These games are monoliths to the idea of difficulty, when in actuality, Their difficulty, in my opinion, is about average for most video games. Anyway, support me on Patreon, join my Discord, and support my sponsor, Item Label.